Hello. So, understanding identity and struggle. Identity is deeply personal, yet, the way society responds to our identities can profoundly affect our lives. Whether we are in a biracial relationship, identifying as LGBTQ, or navigating the world as transgender, the choices we make about our identities of these places, places us at odds with societal expectations. So, today we will explore the struggles faced by individuals, who live outside of these traditional norms, focusing on biracial relationships, LGBTQ identities, and transgender, rights. We will cover today the history, even, of biracial relationships and the ongoing challenges faced by interracial couples. The fight for recognition and equality by the LGBTQ community, including the struggles, of being gay, transgender, engaging in same sex marriage, or simply being in love with someone of a different color. This often brings on brutal gossip, harassment and violence faced by individuals in these communities. Martin Luther King Jr. once said, "Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere." And then he was murdered. Also, Gwen Rojo's story, a tragic example of transgender violence. Ethical dilemmas, such as, whether transgender health care should be provided to incarcerated individuals. For much of American history, biracial relationships were criminalized. Laws banning interracial marriage were upheld until 1967 with the Loving versus Virginia Supreme Court decision, which legalized interracial marriage. Despite the legal victory, though, social acceptance has been much slower to come. Even today, biracial couples significant challenges, including, questions like, what will your children identify as? Mine identify as both, for example, or comments about, their relationship, how it's somehow less legitimate. These intrusive questions reflect a broader issue of racial boundaries that, still exist in many societies. So, for biracial individuals, navigating these spaces can create emotional isolation and uncertainty about their identity. Racial ambiguity often leads to internalized struggles over identity, and biracial children can feel torn, between two worlds, facing rejection from both sides, unless they have two strong parents that love each other and them, plus teach them to be proud of who they are and who they are meant to be. Otherwise, they may struggle with finding their place in society that continues to view race as a rigid, binary. The LGBT community, much like biracial individuals, has faced extreme societal rejection and criminalization up until the late I'd say 20th century, being gay or lesbian was considered illegal in many places. In the 1969 Stonewall riot, LGBTQ individuals fought back against police brutality at the Stonewall Inn in New York, a seminal movement, that sparked the modern gay rights movement. Despite progress, though, significant struggles remain. The fight for same sex marriage, reached a milestone even with the 2015 Supreme Court ruling in Abergefell versus Hodges, I believe, legalizing it across the United States. However, discrimination continues, and LGBTQ people still face challenges, in employment, healthcare, and housing. The transgender community faces a unique set of challenges. Transgender individuals who experience, gender dysmorphia, distress when gender identity does not align with, biological sex, continue to face high rates, though, of discrimination, harassment, and violence. Transitioning, whether socially, medically, or legally, remains a difficult journey for many transgender individuals, and they are often met with misunderstanding and ambiguity, you know. For people in biracial relationships or within the LGBT community, discrimination often manifests as verbal harassment. These can include intrusive questions. Hold on one second. Forgive me, I have dry mouth. So, intrusive questions is where I was at, right? Oh, or, derogatory comments like, who's the man and who's the woman, directed at same sex couples. Or, what are you going to tell your kids about race, towards, biracial couples? Well, I hope something similar to what I say to mine, that any art can become a masterpiece simply by adding and mixing an array of colors. But whatever questions or comments, anyone faces, such as these, reflect an ignorance about and discomfort with identities outside, societal norms. But then the violence often escalates from this harassment. Hate crimes against LGBTQ individuals and biracial people continue to be a grave issue. Matthew Shepard, a gay man murdered in 1998, and Brandon Tina, a transgender man murdered also in 1993, are two well known examples of hate crimes against LGBTQ individuals. The violence and harassment suffered by marginalized individuals are not isolated incidents. Um, those that attack, say they are Christians and that somewhere in the Bible they read a verse, um, often met, you know, with something along the lines, clearly taken out of context, that it was an abomination to what? Make a personal choice? I will tell you that not just a verse, but a clear and repeated commandment in almost every chapter in the Bible, Jesus says to love one another and um, to not judge. Otherwise, you will be judged. And nowhere in the Bible does it say that we should be taking these matters even in our own hands. It reflects systematic issues with our society. It is vital to recognize that while individuals are often targeted, they are also representatives of broader social injustices. When someone faces discrimination for their identity, it shows the failure of society to embrace diversity fully, you know? Gwen Araujo was a 17-year-old transgender girl from California who was murdered in 2002 after her transgender status was revealed at a party. Gwen had been living as her authentic self, but when her identity was outed, so to speak, she became a target of violence. The man who murdered Gwen used the trans panic defense, which argues that discovering someone's transgender identity can provoke violence. This defense, used in many cases involving the murder of transgender individuals, essentially blames the victim's identity for the violence committed, even against them. Gwen's murder led to California, though, passing Gwen's Law, which outlawed the trans panic defense. Her death brought attention to the discriminatory violence against transgender individuals and sparked legislative changes to protect transgender people from such defenses in court. A controversial issue um, today is whether transgender affirming surgeries while even incarcerated. One famous case involved Michelle Kostelic, I think her last name is, a transgender woman who was successfully who successfully sued, for the right to have gender affirming surgery while in prison is baffling. Um, but this case raises significant questions about the responsibilities of the justice system, to provide adequate health care to incarcerated individuals. The debate centers around whether the state should be responsible for funding gender affirming surgery for individuals, convicted of crimes. Supporters argue that denying transgender prisoners this care is a human rights violation, while critics, believe that taxpayers should not bear the expense, especially for those convicted of, serious crimes. This issue also raises broader questions about the role of the justice system in ensuring that the mental and physical health of prisoners is addressed, particularly in terms of mental health and gender dysmorphia, which can be, life threatening if untreated. The struggles we have discussed today, from biracial relationships to LGBTQ rights to transgender healthcare, even in prisons, are interconnected by a common thread: the fight for identity, equality, and human dignity. Each of these struggles represents a broader issue of societal injustice and the need for, compassion, respect, and understanding, for people whose identities challenge conventional, societal norms. The world is constantly changing, and so are the ways in which we understand and recognize each other's identities. It is crucial that we as a society push toward a future where justice is available, for everyone, not just for those who fit into, those traditional molds. Whether it's standing up to harassment, advocating for policy changes, or providing emotional support, we can even make a difference. So, final thought. Back to, hold on. Sorry, got dry mouth. Where was I? Oh, so yeah, final thought back to, when I said injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere, from Dr. Martin Luther King, who said this. When he did, it was in his letter from the Birmingham jail in April 16th, 1963. And it is as true today as ever. Injustice against one group is an injustice against all of us, and we truly want a just society. We must work to ensure that every person, regardless of their race, sexual orientation, or gender, their identity is treated with the dignity and respect they deserve, right? All right, guys, that's all for today. Hope this helps. Bye.